So, conflict resolution expert Dr Kingsley Makhubela is joining us now to speak about the SADC meeting and what some of the discussions around particularly trade will be. A very good evening to you and thank you so much for speaking to us. Perhaps let me first start with President Cyril Ramaphosa's concluding comments, calling this one of the most successful SADC summits yet. Do you agree with this characterization, and why is that?
Good evening, Tsepiso, and thanks for the opportunity. Tsepiso, it may have been a successful summit in terms of the discussion on issues. The challenge, however, is on the implementations of decisions that were taken at the summit. It's rather unfortunate, in my own view, that at this time, President Tshisekedi, Tshilombo, has been elected as the chair of SADC on rotational basis. But President Tshisekedi, Tshilombo, is facing numerous challenges, as your footage was showing, in the eastern DRC. I don't know how is he going to pay attention to some of the issues that President Ramaphosa spoke about, challenges in Cabo Delgado, challenges in Eswatini, challenges that are in Lesotho, and the similar intention that is building in Botswana, one of the most democratic countries, the tension that is there between the former President Khama and current President Masisi, which has the potential, of course, to engulf that country in perpetual insecurity. So these are all issues that will require some diplomatic initiatives, the elders that he's speaking about, to start intervening in some of these areas. But how is President Tshisekedi going to manage doing this? Because in the DRC, Tsepiso, you have about, it's estimated that there are more than 100 armed groups that are operating in the DRC. Of course, compounding that is challenges of neighboring countries. In conflict, there's a terminology that is called diffusional conflict. Diffusional conflict, it basically means if there's a conflict in the DRC, it's likely to impact its neighbors. So its neighbors are impacted in one or another. And that's why you see this perpetual going of conflict between the DRC, even in Rwanda, the DRC and Uganda, and the accusations that are flying around that are, of course, making the resolution of the conflict in the DRC much more difficult.
And I mean, one of the perennial problems that is a stumbling block, particularly for improved intra-regional trade, is delays, particularly at borders, and the impact that has on the value chain going forward. Now, in a situation of conflict, that will no doubt happen. And it is said the lack of adjudication, particularly the legal process of dealing with this within African countries, I mean, it's something that's also been noted in the African Continental Free Trade Area, that there isn't enough of a framework to deal with that.
Tsepiso, you recall 2 years ago, there was a decision taken by the AU on the silencing of the guns. A very good, noble approach by heads of state. But when you scratch the surface and look in the details of what is going to be done to silence the guns, you realize the institutional weaknesses that exist within the continental body, let alone the SADC area. So that's where the challenge is, because summitry is very important meeting of heads of state, but the details that are related to that, it's so crucial. The heads of state have taken a decision now in the DRC on this anti-terrorism unit that will be based in Tanzania. You need to deal with the definition of terrorism, because you find even within the SADC area, there are different definitions and so on. So the consolidation of that and operationalizing the units to really deal with what we are seeing as a threat to the sovereignty and the development of the SADC area, not only in terms of arms. There are human security challenges that we are not dealing with You can't deal with conflict merely sending troops. You need to deal with the underlying issues that are giving impetus to this conflict. And those issues are likely to be found, in most cases we do find them, in terms of human security issues. Food, accommodation, job security, and so on are issues that are giving impetus to this instability.
I wonder what your observations are just with regards to, obviously there is this push for even more ambitious levels of trade between the regional blocs in terms of the AFCFTA, but within the regional blocs themselves, let's take SADC for instance. We speak about COMESA and SADC, the DRC now part of ECOWAS. As I'm talking about this dispute settlement adjudication measures, the issue of punitive measures being taken against African countries for doing trade with Russia, how would that be settled if it is against the interests of one country or another region? I mean, as it is, we have found it very difficult to be progressive in settling our disputes and that safeguarding of national interests when it comes to the EPAs.
Well, food is likely, and food has always been used as a weapon of war, not only in terms of what is developing around the world now. You will see that when Secretary Blinken was in the country here, in the discussion that we've seen in the media with Minister Pandu, this question of country asserting their own sovereignty and making their own decision in terms of how they relate to that conflict that is going on between Russia and Ukraine. It goes back to what the Americans did in the past. You are either with us or with them. But in the world politics, you can't operate like that. Countries take decisions based on their interests. And in this regard, the movement of fertilizers, it's a huge thing in terms of developing country, food security. I mean, Egypt depends to a very large extent to it that it gets from Russia and Ukraine. So the Egyptians would have to behave in a way that safeguards their own strategic interests and provides security for their food. So the whole food market has been disrupted. The energy market around the world has been disrupted by the conflict. So there are underlying issues that we as Africans ought to take decision. Unfortunately, when you look at the decision of the summit, with respect, the recently concluded summit in the DRC, with respect to this conflict, you don't hear a detailed strategic pronouncement coming from heads of state to say, this is how we intend to interface and deal with the unintended consequences of that conflict.
Well, thank you so much for speaking to us. Much appreciated, sharing his views on the recently concluded SADC conference there in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo. That is Dr. Kingsley Makhubela, just speaking to us about various issues arising from that.